Hi, welcome to session 6, Fulltext screening. This week we're still learning how to retrieve, manage and screen papers to fulfill PRISMA reporting guidelines. Next week is data extraction and risk of bias, so we need to get retrieving, managing and screening our papers wrapped up so we can move on to getting data out of the papers that have passed screening. So in terms of what this week's session should give you, it should give you confidence that you can retrieve, manage and screen references. In terms of completing this week's session, you need to have made sure that you've completed the action points from the last sessions. So looking at week 3, you need to make sure that you've built your search strategy from the search terms that we've taken from other overlapping reviews, that you've recorded your search strategy using the PRISMA S checklist, that you've had your search strategy checked by some peers using the PRESS checklist, and that you've iterated and rechecked your search terms if necessary, and you've talked through your search terms with your supervisor. You need to have run your searches in Central, Ovid Medline, Ovid PsycInfo, Ovid EdBase and Web of Science, and you need to import your search results into Endnote and record the total. Last week, you should have deduplicated your search results. You should have confirmed your screening eligibility criteria as per PRISMA with your supervisor. You need to have completed title and abstract screening and recorded your decisions and reported your percentage of agreement and completed the first part of the PRISMA flow diagram. Now, before we move on to this session, I just want to say something about the assessment. The rubric that we use to mark your report is essentially the PRISMA 2020 checklist. In other words, your markers will be looking at the extent to which you've followed the guidelines. And as such, so far in the module, we've looked at the title, the rationale for the study in the context of the existing literature, the objective of your review, and what the eligibility criteria are. We know what the information sources are, and we know what the search strategy is. We also know what the selection process is, and so therefore start looking at the PRISMA checklist and the PRISMA explanation and elaboration document to make sure you know what you need to start recording. Now, I've put those in the description of this video, and I've put them in the course materials in Teams. Now, I talked about reporting guidelines in session 4, and I specifically went through the sections on eligibility criteria and selection processes. Now, I don't want to repeat myself, so if any of you are unclear about what the eligibility criteria are for your review, please do go back and watch the first few slides of last week's talk. Now, I said I wouldn't repeat myself, but I'm just going to quickly repeat that it is vital that you are specific about all study characteristics being used as to whether the study was eligible for inclusion in the review. So you need to really clearly state what the components from the PCOS framework are, and if you're using any other characteristics such as eligible study designs or settings or minimum duration of follow-up or year of dissemination or language or report status, such as whether it's published or whether a conference abstracts were included, that all needs to be reported clearly so people can judge how useful the review will be to them. Now, in terms of what you're doing, you need to be extremely clear. Transparency is absolutely the key. And as an example of being clear about eligibility criteria, here's an example from the explanation and elaboration document for the PRISMA 2020 checklist. So remember, the explanation and elaboration document tells you what you need to report, why you need to report it, and gives you an example of a good report. So I'm just going to read this out. Population includes randomized controlled trials of adult patients undergoing non-cardiac surgery, excluding organ transplantation surgery, as in findings in patients who need immunosuppressant may not be generalizable to others. Intervention. We considered all perioperative care interventions identified by the search if they were protocolized and were started and completed during the perioperative pathway. Examples of interventions we did or did not deem perioperative in nature included long-term perioperative drug treatment and perioperative physiotherapy interventions. We excluded studies in which the intervention was directly related to a surgical technique. Outcomes. To be included, a trial had to use a defined clinical outcome relating to postoperative pulmonary complications, such as pneumonia, diagnosed according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's definition. Randomized control trials reporting solely physiological or biochemical outcomes are valuable, but neither patient-centric nor necessarily clinically relevant, and therefore we excluded them. We applied no language restrictions. Our primary outcome measure was the incidence of postoperative pulmonary complications, with postoperative pulmonary complications being defined as the composite of any respiratory infection, respiratory failure, pleural effusion, atelectasis, pneumothorax. Where composite pulmonary complication was not reported, we contacted the corresponding authors via email to request additional information, including primary data. Can't be clearer than that. And again, I don't want to repeat myself, but you need to be clear about the details of the selection process. So again, if you're not sure what to report, look at the beginning of the session 5 video. In terms of full text exclusion criteria, these are the same inclusion criteria as you had before, but you want to make the job of excluding full text papers as easy as possible. So be absolutely clear what's in and what's out. And it could be any one of the population, intervention, comparator, outcome and study design. So you don't have to have all of them if you're not using all of those as eligibility criteria. But if you are, make it really explicit. If you require studies to have a minimum length of follow-up, make that explicit. If there are specific outcomes, set them out clearly. What you want to make sure is that when you're reading a full text, you immediately have to hand what it takes for a study to be included and what that means for ones that are excluded. So you can work through those full text reports as clearly and cleanly as possible, and hopefully that will minimize disagreement when you come to resolve disputes. You do need to report the reasons you excluded studies, but you only need to report the first reason you see to not include a study. Before we search for full text so we can do screening, because it's a pain to share the large files that contain the full text attachments, it makes more sense to split the EndNote library that contains all your screened and de-disputed records in it before we search for full texts. So I'm assuming that you've probably got the record number showing already, but if you haven't, up in the far left-hand column in EndNote, right-click and you'll scroll down, you can see you can click to show record number. And then order the library by record number. So this is the library I'm talking about that is just your de-disputed title and abstract screened records. So you've ordered that by record number, and then split that file by the number of pairs you have. So you remember we highlight, say there were 7 of you in a group, 1 of you is going to do de-disputing, so that leaves 3 pairs of 2. So highlight the first third and then add references to and create custom group, and then you name that by your pair and do that for each of the pairs so you've got all the records covered by 1 pair. Okay, so then make sure that's shared so that goes to the right pair, and then you can make a start on searching for full texts. Let's assume you've got your group for your pair, and it's time to find the full text so you can do the screening. So the way you do that is you go in EndNote, edit preferences, find full text, and then where it gives you the option of having an open URL path, add in http://library.leeds.ac.uk/reserve, RESSERV, and make sure the open URL path is ticked, and then go back into your EndNote library. And again, like before, in the far left column, right click and show attachments. So you can see then when you start getting references attached, when you start getting full text attached, you can see which records are missing attachments. Just to say, if you can't see show attachments in that list when you right click, it might be that you need to click the little arrow at the bottom of that drop down menu and then you'll see it. Now, then you go over into nearly all the way across on the icons onto the little page and a magnifying glass button and hit that, and it will start searching for the full text. Now, it won't find absolutely everything, but it will get you most of the way. After that, it's a case of beg, stealing and borrowing to find the rest of the full texts. So I would start with Google Scholar, then look in ResearchGate, and I'm not allowed to tell you about Sci-Hub, so I won't tell you about that. So now I'm going to show you how to find papers using Endnote and Fulltext, and I'll also show you how to add papers into Endnote. I'm in an Endnote library and I've got no attachments column showing and I've got no record number showing. So let's get both of those up first. So I've right-clicked on this far left column and now I want to tick record number, and now I can see that, and I want to right-click again, scroll down to the bottom and click file attachments. So you can see here I've got no file attachments. Now I'm going to go edit, preferences, find full text, and you can see I've already pasted in here in the open URL path http://lib.leeds.ac.uk/resserv. I've got my little open URL text box applied, ticked. Okay. Right, so now I need to search. First thing you need to do is you need to highlight some. Now, just a warning, if you highlight more than 250 at a time, it won't search. And to be honest, it's pretty slow anyway. So I would search a few at a time, say 10 at a time, and see how that goes. So there's 11 here, so it shouldn't take too long. So I've highlighted it, and I'm going to click here, search the web for full text documents for the selected references. And let's see how long that takes. Okay, you can see here that I have found 5 full texts. So let's just click here, and you can see up the top, there's the full text. And now you can see here's one that I didn't find. So let's search Google for it, copy. I've pasted that in Google, and let's see what's available. And you can see there, it wasn't available on Google, but it is available in ResearchGate. So I'm going to hit download, and I've downloaded it. And now I'm going to attach that. I've hit attach, and now it's attached to my record. Now it's indexed the PDF, and now it's attached. And that's how you search for full text using Endnote. And that's how you also search elsewhere and attach files to a record in Endnote. You've been in Endnote and you've searched for full text and you've attached them all automatically, and those that you haven't that Endnote hasn't found, you've gone and found them elsewhere and you've attached those files. So you're just working in your records that you've been allocated as a screening pair. Okay, so in Endnote, highlight those records. And what you want to do is then export them as an XML file. Now, the XML file doesn't contain the PDFs. In terms of viewing the PDFs, the easiest way to do that is in Endnote. It's got a built-in PDF viewer. Just once you've clicked on a record, if it's got a PDF attached, you'll see the PDF at the top on the right-hand side. Double-click on that and it'll open up and you can view it and read it in there. But you can't record your screening decisions in Endnote. To record your screening decisions, you're going to need to go to Screenatron. So open up SR Accelerator and click on Screenatron. Upload your XML file that you've just exported and select undecided. You might want to, whilst you're here, change the library name and save that, because it means when you export your screening decisions, it'll be easy to see. So you've selected undecided, you've hit View, Show All Abstracts, so you can see all the abstracts in there. And the first thing you want to do is change the group labels and the hotkey. So for me, the first thing I want to do is change exclude to include. Okay, so that's because that one's on its own. That's the one that where you know you're going to include it. And then group 2, change that to reviews, just in case any reviews have slipped through this far. Change group 3 to duplicates. So if you've got any duplicates that have slipped through, you can press it there. And then from 4 onwards, I would start choosing the inclusion criteria that you're going to exclude on. So if it doesn't meet population, that's 4. Next group I'd add would be group intervention, that would be group 5. So for me, thinking of where my review title is exercise interventions for people with bronchiectasis with an outcome of spirometry, my population is people with bronchiectasis. If the full text don't meet that criteria, I'm excluding on those. And once you've defined all your criteria that you are going to exclude on, including the methodological ones, then you can start your process of recording your decisions. So switch back into Endnote, read through your full text, decide whether it's in or out. So say I read through my full text and I see the population isn't bronchiectasis or isn't non-CF bronchiectasis, it's CF. I would click 4 in my case to say that I was excluding it because it wasn't the right population. And I would go through all the full text until I'd record all my decisions. And then I would want to record those numbers. Now, if the reason you are excluding is it's a duplicate, then you need to take that number away from your non-duplicates in your PRISMA flow diagram. So if you've got duplicates there that have slipped through, you need to take that number away from records marked for retrieval, add it to the duplicates record removed number up in the top right hand side of your PRISMA flow diagram. Now if it's a review, that's not included either, and so you're going to be excluding that because it's a review. But we're going to use those review exclusions later. So make sure you keep a copy of the XML group that is reviews as well as the XML group that's inclusion, and make sure you mark down the numbers for all your other reasons for excluding. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, so I'm in Endnote, and I'm in my group that contains my records where I've got full text attached, and we're going to pretend that I've got all the full text now. So I'm just going to highlight them, and then I'm going to file, export, give them a sensible name. So pair 1, full text screening, and then the date. And I'm going to remember to export it as an XML file, otherwise Screenatron won't be able to read it. I'm going to hit yes. And then I'm going to go to Screenatron. So I'm in SR accelerator, and I'm in the Screenatron section, and I'm going to browse to my XML file. There it is. And I'm going to hit upload. Okay, so you can see I've got my 11 references there. You'll have more than that, I'm sure. The next thing I want to do is change my groups so I can easily record my decisions. And remember, I wanted group 1 to be include, then group 2 to be reviews, group 3 to be duplicates, and then after that I wanted my eligibility criteria. So I'm just going to do that now. I'm going to get rid of the alternate hotkeys. I'm going to call this include, and I'm going to change this one to reviews. Get rid of that. Okay, and then my next group that I'm going to add is going to be duplicates. And then I'm going to start adding my eligibility criteria. So my first eligibility criteria is my population. And I'm going to give that key 4. And my next eligibility criteria is intervention. and I'm going to give that key 5. My next eligibility criteria is outcome. I'm going to give that key 6. And then my only other eligibility criteria is study design, which for me, I'm only accepting RCTs, and I'm going to give that key 7. Okay. Now, you can't do the screening in Screenatron now. You need to switch back to Endnote and click on the PDFs in the sidebar to view them to make your decisions about whether they're included or excluded. So I'm not going to pretend to do that now, but the key is that you allocate included records into your include group, and then any reviews that have snuck through, you add them into the review group. If any duplicates have snuck through, you add them into the duplicate group. And then you exclude on the basis of the eligibility criteria, and you record those decisions. When you've done all that, obviously you're going to want to export your include group to take forward for data extraction. But you also want to exclude the review group because you might want to go through and do citation searching in those reviews. You're also going to want to know how many duplicates there were that have snuck through, because you're going to want to remove that number from your record sort for retrieval amount and add it back into your duplicate records removed file number. Okay, so once you've done that, import the XML files for your include group, and separately into another group import your review XML, so that we can then look at that and see if we can search those citations and see what's there. Okay, so in Screenatron, you've done your screening and you've allocated your records to include or duplicate or review or excluded for one of the reasons of eligibility. Now, you've then taken the include XML file and you've re-imported that into your library, and that's your record of ones you're going to take forward for data extraction for inclusion in your review. And obviously you're going to collect up the similar records from your colleagues who've also done screening, and those will be the studies that you know you're going to include in your review. But what about that XML file containing reviews? Well, you need to look in that and see what reviews are in there, because if you think those reviews might contain records that you might not have retrieved yourself, you need to go and look through the citations. So it's really easy to do. The records that relate to reviews are from Web of Science, because then in Web of Science you can go down into the far right sidebar. Down at the bottom you'll see there's a link to Web of Science article record, and if you click on that, what you find is that it then opens up all the citations that are in that review. Use the WAS record link and then view. Once you've got the record of the review up, click cited records and click view as set of records. And once you've got the citations up, you'll need to export the XML file and import it into Endnote as a group called review citations. And once you've collected all the review citations for all the reviews you found, use Screenatron to screen and subsequently use Disputatron to resolve disputes as per week 5. So you're treating those citations from those reviews as if they were the results of your searches. And then you're back to where we were at the start of this week, and any of that have made it through that process, you'll then want to collect those full texts and screen them as their full text. And if any of those make it through, obviously then add them to your records of studies that you're going to include in your review. So this is a way of searching through reviews that look relevant but that you're not going to include because you're only including primary studies, but you're searching through the citations of those reviews to see if there are any studies that your results have missed. Now, how do you record those studies that you've missed? Well, this is the PRISMA 2020 flow diagram that we'll be using if you need to include papers that you found in reviews rather than directly via searches. And if you see up at the top right, you can see citation searching, open parentheses, n equals, and so on. And in there, you record the number of citations you've retrieved from reviews where you've searched through the citations. Then below that, in the middle on the right, you can see where from those you need to retrieve the full text. And beside that, then there's the ones that you excluded. And then below that, you can see that eventually those studies that make it through, that pass full text screening, get added into the list where they're going to be included in the review. And then there's no distinction at that point between records or studies that you found via searches and studies that you found via citation searching of review. So the main takeaway from this is that in this flow diagram, you treat papers that you found via review citation searches as entirely separate until right at the end when you've titled an abstract and full text screened them. Now, I'm not going to demonstrate this for you because other than clicking the link in Endnote to see if it's a Web of Science record or searching for the review title in Web of Science if it wasn't a Web of Science record and then clicking the cited record link, other than that, everything is the same as searching Web of Science and retrieving records in Web of Science, which I demonstrated in week 4. And all the title and abstract screening I showed last week and the full text screening I've just shown you. So it's essentially the same as you already know, but instead of retrieving the results of searches, you're retrieving the citations from within reviews. Okay, so we've rattled through that today. So I just want to kind of set out where you need to be by this time next week. Now, I've assumed you've already done the action points from the previous week. So by next week, what you need to have done is have confirmed your full text eligibility operationalization with your supervisor. You then need to retrieve the full text and split the screening by pairs. You then need to undertake the full text screening and report percentage agreement of in and out, and once that's done, the reasons why you excluded. You need to report the reasons for exclusion, and then you also need to collect the review citations. If there are lots of review citations, you may wish to split the screening by pair if need be. Otherwise, just undertake the screening in Screenatron and then resolve the disputes in Disputatron and retrieve the full text from those records that make it through that far, and then full text screen these two and record those results. And then you will be at a point where you'll know all the records that have made it through title and abstract screening, all the records that made it through full text screening. You'll know the percentage agreement in title and abstract screening, the percentage agreement in full text screening, and the reasons for exclusion in full text screening. So that's where you should be at the end of next week with all those reasons recorded, all that percentage agreement recorded, all those numbers recorded, and finally at the bottom of all that, a number of studies that have made it through for data extraction in your review. So what will we be doing next week? Well, next week we're moving on to data extraction. So we'll be looking at choosing data items. I'll be introducing you to risk of bias 2. I'll be introducing you to mixed methods appraisal tool, 2018 version, and I'll be showing you how to make use of a data extraction tool. Okay, thanks for joining today, and I will see you next week.